I'm going to go live. I'm going to do it live properly. So electricians charge £100 to change one of these. I'm going to do it live properly. There are actually six things that most people, there are actually six things they do that most people skip. And if you miss them, you can cause overheating or even worse. These six things are: turn the power off at the consumer unit, test if it's dead, double your connections for a solid grip, earth the back box, no exposed copper ever, and six, torque torque it correctly, about 1.4 to 2 Newton meters. Let's see how long this actually takes us and if it's worth £100. So in this case, as painting, decorating, and plastering was taking place, to protect the wires, we had covered it. So let's pop this out, and hopefully our terminals are unaffected. In this case, it looks like we have something on the ends of most of the copper wires, and this looks like it's blue grit. So the first thing we'll do is let's just get all the wires out and get ourselves familiar with what it is. This is a ring circuit, meaning a wire would come from the consumer unit, go to the first socket and subsequent sockets, and come back into the consumer unit. So this green and yellow wire, so it goes without saying, but we'll make sure the power is dead at the consumer unit. And we can use this volt pen to test if that's the case. You want to make sure your volt pen's working by testing it on a live socket. In this case, it is working. The power is off. And the tools needed for this job would be wire strippers, some pliers, a wire cutter, a Torx screwdriver, and this is where you set up the torque. You turn this to get it to the appropriate torque setting. For example, if you have light switches, the setting is 1.4 Newton meters. For sockets, it's around 2. For consumer unit connections, it could be 2.5, but it's always good to check with the manufacturer's instructions. So now, let's have a look at what's in our socket plate. Now, this is a plastic socket. Not a big fan of them. However, it's the customer's prerogative. Back at the socket, we see earth, live, neutral, and earth again. You can see this metal strip that runs across. It makes contact with this earth terminal, and the two holes where the screws would go, which will make contact with the back box. So just by putting earth in either one of these, you make sure the back box and the socket plate is earthed. The other option you could do is you could attach one earth wire on this side, one on this side, or one at the terminal and the other one at the back of the back box. However, it's all the same as the connection is maintained. So just connecting it at the earth terminal would be sufficient. You can see the brown, that's for the live wire or the line wire, and blue, which is for neutral. In old style wiring, the red wire was the line wire and the black wire was the neutral wire. As you can see, this is a new build. So what we'll do is let's just straighten all the terminals so we get a rough idea of how long our cables are. So the two neutrals, we can move them to one side right now here, as we can do the same with earth. And now with our line wire. Our line wires are the two longest wires. So what we'll do is we won't start with our line cables. This neutral wire is pretty short, so we will start with this one. As you can see, these connections have been doubled over, but as that residue is there, it'd be more comfortable to just make a new connection. So now, let's have a look at the back. The two neutrals will be pushed in here. One way to check how the length of the cable, copper cable you need to cut, is by inserting to check if it fits or not. Now in this case, we don't want any copper to be exposed, so we could make it slightly smaller than this one, and you can measure it with a ruler and adjust the setting on your wire strippers so it doesn't go longer than your desired length. So now let's use our wire cutters to cut the ends of the terminal off. There we go, that's one done. Let's just stick with this one until we're finished. Now I have calculated that I will need to strip around this much. So the stripper peels off the plastic sheathing. Now to double over our connections, we get a little less than half and bend it on itself. And you can close it up. And we close the gap in the middle. Okay. We'll straighten it up. This part is the only tricky part in the whole installation, to get the sizing correct. Sometimes you need to make sure you've had your breakfast, as it requires some extra strength just to close the terminal up. Now, the reason why we double over our connections is so it can get a solid grip. Last thing we want is loose connections, which can cause overheating and can lead to accidents. So that's one of our cables done. As you can see, this is a very short cable. And ideally, you want to leave your cables around 100 mil longer than the edge of the socket box. Can you see? This would be our working length, which is pretty short. However, what we can do is, instead of cutting this blue wire to the size of the cable, we could leave it longer and just bend it in place. So let's do the same here. We can use pliers to cut as well. Let's get our strippers out. Now what we can do, as the last one was a slightly shorter, just a millimeter or so. So this one, we will get it a bit longer than a millimeter. Same thing, we'll double over our connections. If you don't like the pliers, you could use narrow nose pliers. I prefer using the pliers. However, this is cool as well. Just close the gap. Okay. Now, we could just check the size. Remember, we don't want any copper wire exposed. That's good. That's perfect. Okay. So one thing we could do is make all our connections and then put them in together, which seems like a decent idea. But in this case, let's just attach them in. So we manipulate. We manipulate the wires. The other tip is make sure all your connections the screws are loose and open, as this would get easier for your cables to slide in. So our neutral wire is I think I must change the camera angle. Now, this is important. As you're screwing in the cables, hold the wires with one hand and make sure they're being pushed in and they don't slide out. Get your Torx screwdriver, and we tighten it. Hold the cables with one hand and tighten it until you hear a click, as that would determine your torque setting. That's the click. That's the torque setting done. Another thing you could do is gently pull on the wires to see if the connection is secure. In this case, it is. So we do the same with the line, and then we'll do the same with the two earth wires. Okay, so there we go. Now I feel what would be better. A little more. This is why I feel it's much better to make all your connections, double over your connections first, as you have more room to work with. Okay, close the gap. Same again. I feel what I will do is change the camera position so you're looking over. Make it easier to view. Let's try that. See. Oh dear. We're having technical difficulties. Okay. Now, just make sure. We need to close this gap. Okay, and now we will slide them in. Now, one mistake you can make is reversing the pole. You could put the neutral in the line and vice versa. So this is why at the end you want to test your connections to see if the polarity is correct. Make sure none of the copper is exposed. So push the wire in with one hand and we hold it. Okay, that's perfect. And now they have a tendency to pop out, slide out as you're screwing them in. So hence why we hold them in place until we hear a click. Give it a slight tug to make sure they're in properly. And now we only have the earth terminal. Now this one is perfect. As I guess we should cut this one. So we get our wire cutters, cut off the terminal. Let's pull out the earth sheathing. And now we'll need to cut it shorter, as we need to double over our connections. So this much would be sufficient. Cut the earth sleeving. Push the earth sleeving in, exposing the copper. Right? And this copper is slightly long, so we can shorten it. Now, let's double over this connection. Close the gap. Okay, you see it's twisted, so we'll just reposition it straight using your pliers. Awesome. Now, as I was telling you, we can have one here and the other one here. And just to demonstrate, let's just slide it in there. The worst thing we can do is cut our wires short. There's plenty of space in the back box if it's a 35mm back box, which in this case it is. Sometimes what you could do is you could pull the cable out after you've secured it, just to see the bite mark of the screw on the copper sheet, on the copper cable. And this will ensure you have a good connection. Or it would put your mind at ease that you do have a good connection. We do the same with this earth cable. And let's a little bit more. Boom. So all our connections are in. None of the copper is exposed. They're tight and set to bend the wires. Now this is the other time when wires can pop out. If you do need to bend it, you could use your screwdriver. Usually they will nicely bend in place. We'll push the socket in and we get a spirit meter to check if it's level. Now be careful. The meter can make mark on your freshly painted walls, so just watch out for that. Now, our socket is in. Let me go get. Now you want to be careful when you're putting your screws in your socket, so you don't cross thread. Sorry, excuse the camera angle. Okay, so now let's get some fine threaded screws. Apologies, that was disaster. Couldn't find them. So now, what we will want to do is get these come in different sizes. The small ones come free with the socket, and you get extra large ones, which you can buy. They're more expensive. The large ones will make life easy for you. But it's not impossible with the small ones, by any means. So what we do, slide the screws in. Make sure they're in line with the hole. Okay, and now I like to hand tighten them, start them off to make sure they're not cross-threaded. Okay, and then we can finish off. Just gently. See, that's how it looks when it's cross-threaded. Now this one's cross-threaded. So take this one out. Maybe we need to move the camera slightly back. Oopsie. It does save your wrist, but there are chances of the threads being stripped. So now we make our final readjustments. Okay, right there. Okay, and there we go. I have it in line. And now it's a moment of putting on the faceplate. Again, plastic, it could get scratched. That's what the customer wants. We give the socket plate a wipe and we're done. 26 minutes.